a lot of tokens don't vote.
Was any DAO voting ever been hacked?
The attacker took about $140 million. Proposal is that it does exactly what you tell it to do, even if that's not what you meant.
Biden decided something, and then we have 7 days to have a popular vote to kind of cancel that. What about quorum?
Yeah, that is a really tough question. And when those ideas work, they get copied, which is great.
So we're reinventing everything on chain. Welcome to DAO Heroes. This is a channel for crypto professionals, people who work in DAOs, start DAOs, invest in DAOs, or consider a career move from traditional industries to Web3. This is your place to learn about the hottest topics and trends and get more knowledgeable about topics like today's one, which is DAO governance. And here with us is Rafael Solari from Tally, one of the best and most sophisticated governance systems for DAOs on the market, serving blue chip, high profile, primarily protocol and DeFi DAOs. And we can't wait to dive deeper to talk about how to design your voting system and how to make big choices like private or public governance, whether to keep your governance on-chain, off-chain, whether to use L2 chains, L1 chains, how to balance security and usability in governance, and how to make most interesting decisions together. Thank you, Raf, for stopping by, and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Yuri. Excited to talk about this stuff. I think about it a lot and love talking to people about it.
Awesome. And if you're new to the channel, please subscribe. There are more interviews like this one. So let's start with Raf's background. So how you got to Web3, what got you in, how the Tally got started, what's the mission of the Tally, give us more background. And you're a co-founder, so what's your role within the Tally as well?
I have been very interested in and excited about blockchains and crypto for a long time. I studied computer science in school and worked in the tech industry at Web2 startups for a long time, and had always been very excited about the promise of blockchain as a platform, both as a platform for building applications, but I think even more importantly as a political technology for building organizations, which it turns out I was thinking of DAOs.
How old is Tally? How many rounds? Maybe some key metrics, how many customers or how many votes, how you measure your own success?
Yeah. Tally is about a year and a half old. My co-founder and I, Dennis, met at this co-working space called Crypto NYC in New York, which was a big co-working space before the pandemic, very crypto focused. And we spent a lot of time thinking about DAOs. And we talked to a lot of DAOs at that space, and we had seen a lot of people starting DAOs and thinking about DAO tooling. But what we realized is during DeFi summer, about a year and a half ago, something had really changed. And all these DeFi projects were launching governance tokens and giving them out, and we realized there was suddenly something to govern. So all of the ideas people had been kicking around about DAOs were suddenly very relevant because people were trying to actually do it live and make DAOs in production.
Awesome. So this was even before the NFT boom. So it was before Bored Apes, before the OpenSea explosion. So you were really early, and it was really helping to be in the right kind of nexus, the right place, the right kind of having coffees with the right people at the right time. Awesome.
Yeah, it was a bit smaller back then.
Yeah, I, for sure. Where Tally is going? What's the overall mission, what you've learned along the way, and how you maybe redefine or make your vision more specific or more detailed?
Yeah. One big change has been what we just talked about, how the space has grown so much. So when we first launched, our initial customers were basically Solidity programmers making DeFi protocols. So our app was frankly pretty hard to use, but also very focused on this very technical audience who just wanted a relatively easy way to do what they already knew how it works. They just wanted an easy way to do it and see what was going on in their projects. Since then, we've realized that a lot of other people are also very excited about DAOs, and they also want to start them. So we've been spending a lot of time over the past 12 months making Tally easier to use for non-developers, make it easy for anyone to run an organization and vote on proposals and spend money with their friends. And we think, because we've seen DAOs have a lot of other use cases besides running DeFi protocols. As you mentioned, people are using NFTs in their social communities. We have also seen people start social clubs like Friends with Benefits. We've seen people start media empires. There's a whole lot of things that DAOs work really well for.
Awesome. And do you support only token-based voting or NFT-based voting as well?
We support both. I would say the majority of DAOs on Tally are token-based voting, but there are definitely a few that use NFTs. Nouns DAO is a pretty cool NFT art project that uses token voting, and also Dope Wars is a community that we are very excited to support. They're building a decentralized video game based on loot style NFT tokens.
Any metrics to share about tally, number of votes, number of people who participated in votes, or number of DAOs you serve? Any metric that you're comfortable sharing?
But we look especially at the number of DAOs using Tally. So since we added self-serve in December, we have seen a ton more people adding their DAOs to Tally. We have hundreds of people adding testnet DAOs because they're trying out Tally. And on the front page of Tally, you can see, I think today there are maybe 65, 70 DAOs in production that are using Tally to power their voting.
Awesome. And each of them is like very high quality, high caliber project. So let's talk a little bit maybe about overall kind of the market and the category of DAO governance. So let's start maybe with quick explainer. So people have tokens or NFTs of the project. They can make proposals, they can vote. So what are the key terms to know? The proposal, the duration, the quorum, like what are the key terms that you teach people about?
Yeah. So the main things you need to set up a DAO on Tally are a token. It doesn't have to be fungible or not fungible, and a governor, which is the contract that determines what the rules are for making changes. So a governor has things like a proposal, which is a proposed transaction or a proposed change. It could be to the governor itself. And then the proposal goes to vote. So the voting on these governor contracts is self-executing. There's no trusted party besides the blockchain and the governor contract to actually make the change that was voted on. So the proposal, when it's made, has both some text about what the intent is and a programmatic payload about what the actual transactions are going to be. So that is very often moving some money around. That's the most common proposal we see, but it could be anything that you can do on chain. It includes things like updating DeFi smart contracts, managing permissions, creating NFTs, minting tokens, gaining control of DAOs that live underneath the main DAO. It's a very powerful tool because DAOs are in a lot of ways like a wallet that can do anything, except it's a shared wallet. It's a group of sometimes a small number of people on a multi-sig, sometimes a huge number of people on these large DeFi DAOs.
So there is like a human readable summary and there is a payload. That is
exactly.
executable part. At the technical level, it's either move money around or make a change on the underlying, the main smart contract. So my understanding, there is the main smart contract for the protocol or the DAO or the technology, and then there's a smaller smart contract that might be either independent or like a sub-module of the main one, which is the governance module, which is describe how governance works.
Yeah, exactly. Generally, there are two main contracts: the token contract to keep track of everyone's token balance, and the governor contract that manages these proposals. And the proposals have a life cycle. They're started, they're up for vote. Eventually, the vote finishes, and they passed or failed, and then they get executed.
And there might be a third contract, which is like the underlying protocol. If it's like Uniswap, there is also a protocol that actually does the work what the DAO is for.
Exactly. And in general, in that setup, the governor is the admin of that protocol contract. So in like Compound's case, the Compound governor is the only contract, the only wallet that has power over the Compound lending protocol. Actually, it's a little more complicated because there's one other contract in between the governor and the protocol. Is a time lock contract. So the time lock contract is a delay between when the vote executes or when the vote finishes and when the vote actually executes, which gives everyone some time to react if there's a really big vote that's a big change. But yeah, in general, the idea is that the governor and the time lock is the admin of the protocol, and there's no person or company that's administering the protocol, and that's kind of incredibly neutral. Everyone can understand who controls the protocol, and that makes it easier for developers to build on.
Awesome. So let's talk about security, because it feels like if it is like once the vote is done in that situation, if it's executed, no one can stop it. Feels very powerful and a little scary. So what are the security considerations? Was any DAO voting ever been hacked? Anything people do to prevent that? Like what people need to know about security in relations to DAO governance?
Yeah, we've seen a lot of security failures and some successes. I think the main thing with running the DAO on chain is just like a computer. The problem with a computer is that it does exactly what you tell it to do. The problem with a smart contract proposal is that it does exactly what you tell it to do, even if that's not what you meant. Or if you don't agree, or someone else is telling it exactly what it should do, and you have to decide if that's exactly right. So we have seen a few different kinds of attacks on these DAOs. One of the most recent ones that was interesting was a flash loan attack on Beanstalk. So this was about a month ago, where because the votes are token based, but tokens are very financialized, very liquid, very fungible, we saw an attacker borrow a whole lot of Beanstalk tokens and then use those Beanstalk tokens to vote themselves control of the protocol. And they used a flash loan. So actually they never even had enough collateral to borrow the tokens. They just minted all of the tokens in a loan that was infinitesimally short. And then in the middle of that infinitesimal loan, they voted themselves control of the protocol. So there are that is not an attack that's possible on most on-chain DAOs. It was only that particular DAO that had this vulnerability. Most DAOs don't let you vote instantly. They make sure you have to vote the tokens for a long period of time if you're voting.
Did they completely destroy the project? There was some remedy, or like how much money was lost?
Unfortunately, they took everything. The attacker took about $140 million of assets from the protocol. I think they only got half of it. I think half. So 70 million was somehow destroyed, and 70 million the attacker took and sold on the market. And as far as I know, they got away with it. So it's definitely, you have to be very careful when you are giving control of a valuable protocol to a smart contract, because the smart contract is going to do whatever it's programmed to do. So it's like other forms of security engineering. You have to be very careful to understand all the edge cases up front, and be very careful to do your homework. Look at all of the prior failures and the prior cases. Just like when people are designing an airplane or an automobile, there's a long history of all of the things that have gone wrong, and the engineers have to take into account all those stories and try to learn as much as they can from them.
Got it. And are there any audit firms that are recommended specifically for DAO governance checks?
Yeah, there are lots of great audit firms. We've worked closely with Open Zeppelin. They wrote a contract called Open Zeppelin Governor that we support at Tally, and is a widely used open source contract that lots of DAOs are building on top of. And so they wrote that contract, and I think are also very familiar with it for auditing. But there are many other audit firms that have thought a lot about these edge cases and making sure that the governance that someone deploys is safe.
It seems like super scary, and like the cost of mistakes is very high, and therefore maybe some DAOs will consider, how about off-chain governance? How about we vote, and then there is a trusted humans, a council, or like 10 most trusted people, and they decide whether they should actually implement the vote or not, or they have emergency powers for veto or delay or remedy, retraction maybe of the decision. So do you see any shift towards off-chain governance? Which DAOs should use on-chain, which should use off-chain? Like, what's your opinion on the topic?
I think both have their place. We've seen DAOs mix and match them. Some DAOs use both on and off-chain. Some do all of their governance off-chain, and then they trust a small group of DAO admins to actually execute the proposals. And then some of these big DeFi DAOs are entirely on-chain because they don't want to have a trusted middleman or a trusted committee that does the execution. I think both for credible neutrality reasons. It's easier if you're one of the users of these DeFi protocols to trust the smart contracts that you can read than to trust a group of 5 or 3 or 7 admins to do what you expect. But also for legal reasons, I think a lot of the people who might be admins don't want to be a signer on a small committee that controls a very large piece of financial infrastructure. But I think the general thing I would recommend is for smaller DAOs where there's more trust and everyone knows each other, start with off-chain voting, some sort of signal voting, and then use a multi-sig for execution. And then as the DAO gets larger, as the group gets so big that it's hard for everyone to know each other and keep track of each other and trust each other, then consider moving to on-chain governance. And there's definitely a hybrid version that some DAOs have used where the governor, which is controlled by the token holders, makes proposals. And then after the governor passes a proposal, there's a time lock of people who's responsible for executing it or vetoing it if they think that it's not safe or it's dangerous or they disagree with it. Got it.
So essentially the committee can block things but not execute things. So they To execute things, you need both. You need both the popular support and the committee support.
Exactly. And we've also seen people do it the other way. So Fei DAO, or rather Tribe DAO, which is by the team that made Fei and is part of the Fei ecosystem, they just this week are launching a optimistic governance where there's a multi-sig that can do anything, but the token holders can always vote to cancel or veto their transactions. So I think that's a very similar setup. Like you need both people to execute, but it deconstrains the core team because they can try anything, and then whatever transactions they propose, there's like a 7-day window before they execute, and in that, maybe it's less than 7 days. Don't quote me on that, but there's some window before execution, and in that window, the token holders can veto a malicious or just any transaction they disagree with.
Yeah, I just start thinking like how it would go like on national government. Let's say Biden decided something, and then we have 7 days to like have a popular vote to kind of cancel that. that would
the 7-day window can be hard. There was one DAO that was attacked late last year. I think it was around the holidays, because there were not that many people in the DAO, not that many people paying attention. I think this DAO was called Build Finance, and an attacker had just bought a bunch of Build Finance tokens, waited for, I think it was on a long weekend, and then they just made a proposal to steal all the funds that no one noticed, so no one stopped it because they had a very short vote window. I think it was only a few days long, the amount of time that the other holders had to react, and they didn't react in time, unfortunately.
How much was destroyed or stolen in that case? Do you know?
I think it was less than $1 million at the time. So it was a fairly small DAO, but the problem with a very small DAO, and one reason I recommend starting with a multi-sig for a very small DAO, is there might not be that many eyes on it. Like people might miss some malicious proposal.
We give the same recommendation on SuperDAO. The DAOs that start on SuperDAO start most of them small, and we recommend most of them off-chain governance, signal voting, as you said, and multi-sig execution. So this is great. And another related question, what about quorum? So let's say we have a DAO, there are like, I don't know, thousands of members, the millions of members, and how many of them should vote to consider a vote valid?
Yeah, that is a really tough question, because you don't want to put it too high or too low. So it's a Goldilocks problem. It has to be just right. And usually it depends on, the best way to answer that question is to look at the token holdings of the large holders. And because you want to make sure, ideally quorum is not so low that just one person can swing a vote at the last minute. Like the case you really want to avoid is a case where there's a proposal, it's a very bad idea, it's obviously a bad idea, and it's so obviously bad idea that no one is even bothering to vote no, because when they go look at the vote total, it's like 0 people voting yes and a few people voting no. And when you look at that on the webpage, you might think, oh, this is definitely not going to pass. Nobody is voting for it. But the problem is if the quorum is low, some large voter could come in right at the last minute, vote yes, and maybe pass a malicious proposal that benefits them, but it's to the detriment of everybody else in the DAO. So you want to make sure the quorum is high enough that that doesn't happen very often. But if it's too high, then it's really hard for the DAO to get anything done. So it's a tough trade-off to make.
Is the quorum defined in terms of number of people voting or the total percentage of the ownership? And what are the typical numbers, like among your customers? Like where do they place it?
Yeah, sorry, I may have implied that it was number of people, but it's actually number of tokens. And for most of the DAOs on Tally, they place it between 1% and 5% of the total outstanding vote supply.
Oh, interesting. So basically, a lot of proposals get passed with like a couple percent of ownership voting.
Yeah, because what we've seen is that a lot of tokens don't vote, because it depends why. Maybe the owner of the token is not paying attention. Maybe the tokens are in an exchange which doesn't vote with them. Maybe the tokens are locked up for some, especially the DeFi tokens, are locked up for some yield farming scheme or lending scheme, or they're in a liquidity provider. So a lot of tokens aren't voting because either people aren't paying attention or they have something better to do with their tokens. It, I think, pays to keep quorum low for these kind of DeFi DAOs. For a DAO that's more based around making collective decisions, I can imagine like an NFT DAO where everyone is very involved, you might want to pick a higher quorum. But I think definitely not necessary to pick a quorum that's super high, like 50% of people have to vote on something for it to pass. 50% of all outstanding votes have to vote on something for it to pass, because not everyone is going to weigh in on every decision. Certainly, it doesn't make sense to vote on every decision. DAOs are thinking about ways to delegate authority and delegate decisions to people who are focused on a particular problem or particular question. But I think the general version of that applies too. Not every person is going to vote on everything. That's not a way to make decisions at scale.
Awesome. And we're coming to the next topic, which is kind of governance design or voting system design. I don't know what's a proper term. So who are the people who actually make all those decisions for each individual DAO and saying, okay, this is how we're going to vote? And another one is probably delegation. Do you allow people to delegate someone else to vote on your behalf, like in parliamentary kind of democracy? So who are the designers and what are the terms? Are there any places where, governance designers hanging out?
I wish there were more places where governance designers hung out. I think what we've seen so far in governance design is that most DAOs, most people building a DAO are excited about building a community to solve a particular problem, or, to run a protocol or to organize around some NFTs. And they're not thinking too much about novel ways to design governance. And it's a bit risky. It's hard enough to make your startup or your protocol or your community work and get off the ground. And you don't want to also try to reinvent governance because there's big downside, right? If you make a mistake, you could get attacked. We've talked about a couple already. But you want to focus on building a community and launching a product or a protocol, not on reinventing the wheel. So we haven't seen too much new governance innovation. I'd love to see more. We've seen some interesting ideas I talked about Phase Tribe DAO. I think it's a really interesting governance innovation. And Element Finance, Charlie St. Louis was the governance designer at MakerDAO. And he has been working on this new project called Element Finance that launched earlier this year. And they have a novel DAO construction that uses more of a council model where there are people with a lot of delegations are empowered and expected to take an active role in contributing to the DAO. But I think the real answer to the question of where do DAO designers hang out, it's in various DAOs. So we see individual DAOs doing cool governance experiments. ENS has been very active in thinking about how to organize and activate their very large community. Alicia is the DAO lead at ENS, and she has done some great work thinking about how best to organize the group of people to empower people to contribute and improve ENS and Ethereum name system. So I think we've seen a lot of different ideas tried in small formats, and when those ideas work, they get copied, which is great. Like we're kind of in this great spot where of DAOs right now where people are running a lot of small parallel experiments, and the stuff that works people will hear about it and people will copy it. So we'll see.
Yeah, you anticipated my next question is, do you see any kind of templates emerge? Do you have like top 5 templates that tell us, hey, this is the top 5 systems, you should choose one of those 5 that trusted and tested and like someone innovated on them?
Oh, great question. Yeah, I think the main templates we point people to are off-chain voting plus a multi-sig execution for a smaller DAO. And then on-chain voting when the DAO gets a little bit bigger and it's harder to trust. The token holders might not know very well the people doing the execution on the multi-sig. And then as that gets bigger, it sort of breaks down again because not everyone can make every decision. So what you really want there is to look at maybe what Gitcoin DAO and ENS DAO are trying. A very interesting model where most of the token holders delegate to stewards who are committing to be more actively involved in the day-to-day operations of the DAO. And then the stewards turn around and form working groups or pods or sub-DAOs, which they kind of mean the same thing, but people use those definitions a little bit differently. But the main idea is to don't vote on everything. It doesn't make sense. It takes too much time. It's too hard for everyone to vote on everything. So you instead vote to give a budget to this committee or this group or this pod to go solve a particular problem, go work on marketing or work on product or work on audit, something like that.
Awesome. So it looks like an evolution of 4 models with increased kind of complexity and quality of the project. You start with off-chain plus Gnosis. Step 2, you have on-chain, but with veto powers and delays. Step 3, you have a complete on-chain trustless system. And step 4 is you start divide to sub-DAOs and subcommittees and delegate some budgets and local autonomy for individual guilds or areas of work.
Definitely. And I think useful metaphor is growing, right? The DAO is kind of an organism or a system that has to grow and needs support and scaffolding along the way. And as it gets stronger and bigger, we can start pulling away the scaffolding and let it really come into its own. And the goal is to have a really decentralized system that can stand up on its own.
Yeah, someone also said that it's like a speed run of the history of governance in digital, like regular nations. It's like you start with monarchy, and then it's like constitutional monarchy, and then it's a republic, and then it's like a representative democracy with like executive branch, and then soon, I guess, court system and things like that.
Yeah.
Have you seen anything with court side? Kind of any like arbitrage or any kind of humans in the loop?
I've been following the Kleros project. It's a pretty interesting approach to on-chain courts. I think, it's really interesting to just think about the court system and how we can get it in smart contract land because, as you know, common law court systems are really good at resolving ambiguous questions, and smart contracts are really bad at that. So I think it's a very interesting primitive that's right now, I would say, not widely used. I think we probably still have a little bit more to figure out how we can it would be great to just like get all of common law in blockchain somehow. Obviously you need that needs to come from off-chain, that needs to be an Oracle or something. But I think that's a really interesting avenue that I've seen a few people exploring, like at Kleros.
Quick note to anyone who's listening, we always on the hunt for new topics and new guests, so please leave a comment if you have any ideas. One topic that I just recorded for my tracker is crypto courts. So that seems to be a super awesome topic. I've heard a few projects here and there. So thanks, Raf, for like pointing us that direction. And if you guys who listen, any other topics, please like drop in the comments. We're always looking for more interesting things to discuss.
One last thought on courts. The insurance protocols like Nexus Mutual sort of had to invent their own court system.
For
they
claims.
Didn't outsource it. But exactly. A claims adjudication process is probably the closest thing we have to a widely used court system.
Okay, great. So we're reinventing everything on chain. This is amazing. So maybe any learning resources you can point out. I know you guys have also starting a podcast, have an amazing newsletter on governance. So we will put the links in the description of the video. Anything else you can point people out to learn more about governance?
Yeah, I would say, well, first I would call out the newsletter and the podcast specifically. I think the newsletter is this really great resource for going deep on, I talked about learning from the history of past mistakes. We've been writing the newsletter for about a year and a half. We've got every week an issue. They're long, 1,000 or 2,000 words, talking about things going on in protocol governance, DeFi governance, DAO controversy. So there's a lot to learn from. Go check out the archives and sign up to hear about the latest in DeFi and DeFi governance. And then in terms of where people are talking about this stuff, I think the main forum is still crypto Twitter. It's the best place to chat about governance, but come give Tally a follow, give SuperDAO a follow, and keep an eye out for people opining about what's the best way to organize these systems, and really how do we speed run governance structure, corporate structure, and constitution design. I listened to a really great podcast actually by a constitutional law professor, and Tim Ferriss's podcast covered DAOs. I'll have to get the link and put it in the show notes, but as a constitutional law professor who has helped countries that have just gone through a revolution like Tunisia design a new constitution. And he has been geeking out about DAOs for the past year or so because he sees a lot of similar problems. Like it's how do we design these systems that are, perceived as legitimate to the people in them, but also resilient and secure, but also unconstrained enough so that people can get stuff done. Like it's a very hard problem that people have been thinking about long before blockchain started thinking about them. So we have a lot to learn from really governance design in going back for hundreds and thousands of years.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in Russia, and after the collapse of Soviet Union in around 1991, 1992, Russia also went through like rewriting constitution. If I recall correctly, we also had some American consultants or legal scholars who gave opinions or inputs or templates. I think the final decisions were all Russian made, but I think there were some inputs from international sources, and we studied. I think French constitution was also a big inspiration, like strong president, weak parliament, kind of type of system. Yeah, we see we see where it goes. But yeah, so this is great. So today's episode was one of our absolute favorites. So we covered things like how governance work, what are the key terms to know, what are the evolutions of the governance systems based on the complexity of the underlying DAO project, crazy DAO governance hacks, and some steps to avoid them. And also outline some upcoming trends like insurance and courts. So that seems to be exceptionally interesting area. Please subscribe to newsletter and podcast from Tally, as well as from SuperDAO and my company. Subscribe for more episodes like this one. Thanks everyone for participating, and thanks Raf for stopping by.
Thanks so much, Yuri. This was so much fun.